Welcome to Club Soda's Mindful Drinking Festival. We're online, global, and as always, absolutely free. Hi, I'm Drew, and I'm one of the co-founders of Club Soda.
And I'm Laura, the other co-founder of Club Soda. We help you change your drinking in ways that help you live well. So whether you're looking to cut down, stop for a bit, or quit, you can find what you need from podcasts and books and courses on joinclubsoda.com. This festival, we've brought you an amazing lineup from over 100 people from across the world.
And our programme this time really is global.
Every day starts down under with me, Sarah. As well as organising the festival in Australia, I spend my time looking for alcohol-free alternatives and tips for people who choose not to drink, but who still want to live a social, fun and adventurous life.
And I'll be wrapping up each day here in the States. I'm Amanda, your US festival host and coordinator, and I'm also a mindset coach who helps women change their relationship with alcohol so that they can start living their most authentic life.
Each day with a rolling programme of inspirational panels, conversations, social events, and opportunities to discover new low and low alcohol drinks.
So whether you want inspiration to change your drinking,
Or to connect with other people,
or you want to discover and enjoy a new low and no alcohol drink,
The Mindful Drinking Festival is for you.
cheers!
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 cheers.
Hi!
Hi, Annie!
Hi, everybody. So awesome to be here with you guys. Wonderful. This is great. So my name is Annie Grace. I'm the author of This Naked Mind, and I'm let Ella introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Ella St John McGrand. I'm a TV producer on history documentaries, and I'm also a mindset coach for 30-something women.
Wow, that's so great.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of yours, Annie. And I've been dying to ask you, what led you to write This Naked Mind?
So really, it was my own journey, which started in corporate, which I'm sure lots of people can relate to. I wasn't a huge drinker before that, but I was basically told by my boss that, going out to happy hour was a lot like going out to the golf course. It was where the deals were done, and I better hurry up and, show up. And I was like, well, I don't really drink. And he's like, no, it's not about that. So I started my, drinking career in earnest with like a program where I was going to have a glass of water and then a glass of wine and a glass of water and a glass of wine. And to be honest with you, Ella, sometimes I would, drink so much and I'd start to feel tipsy. And I was really passionate about my career. So I didn't want to be that girl. And I would go to the bathroom, I'd throw up a glass of wine just so I could drink more wine, just so I could keep up with all of the colleagues. And I didn't even know alcohol was really addictive, to be honest with you. I was like, oh yeah, a glass of wine's healthy for you. This is no big deal. And then fast forward a decade and I was drinking 2 bottles of wine a night. And I know that sounds hard to believe, but it was really true. I was buying it in the box, so I couldn't tell how much of the box was gone because, there was something psychological about finishing one bottle and having to open another one. And I had 2 young boys at home. I was working for a company that was actually headquartered in London. We were dividing our time between the States and in the UK. And it just reached a point in my life where I had been trying to cut back because it was causing problems in my life. I didn't know how. And when I would try to cut back, every move I made in that direction actually seemed to make my drinking worse. So it wasn't that I could take a week off, I could take a day off, but during that week, during that day, it was the forbidden fruit syndrome would kick in. I would feel much like I was missing out and I wasn't happy. And what was the point? I literally would think things like, well, if I can't have a drink, what's the point of going? And so it was through that experience of actually trying to control my behavior and it becoming worse that I was actually sitting in Heathrow Airport, coming back from a big boozy trip and realizing like I'm bringing the worst of myself back home to my husband and my 2 boys, and they deserve the best of me. And I made a decision, which is totally counterintuitive, but it made sense to me at the time, where I was like, okay, I'm going to stop this roller coaster of trying to stop or cut back and actually things getting worse. I'm going to get off the alcohol diet. I'm going to stop trying to stop drinking. And I'm just going to answer this one question of why? Why is this so important when I'm so in control in every other area of my life? Why do I feel so sad if I can't have this fermented liquid in a glass? Like, what is happening in my mind? And that really kicked off almost a year of research. And I just went through every single reason I drank. And I just started to always been a science nerd. And I just started to go into like all the studies and be like, does it really relax me? Does it really make things more fun? Does it really help my social anxiety? Does it really help me loosen up for sex? All of these reasons I'd given for drinking, started comparing it to, the neurochemistry and what alcohol does in the body and the mind. And about a year later, I walked out of my office. I told my husband, like, I think I'm done drinking. I really don't want to do this anymore. And he was like, what? And I was like, yeah, we can drink tonight if you want to last hurrah or whatever. And that's what we did. And, it's been almost 6 years now and This Naked Mind, the book, was really just a very well edited compilation of my initial journals of all of those discoveries.
Oh, fantastic. No, it's so interesting. It's such a great book. I love it so much. It's wonderful.
So tell me about you, Ella. I would love to know, TV producing, big sexy career, and now you're doing mindset coaching as well. Can you walk me through your journey?
Sure. So I'm from London, UK, and as you know, Annie, and many other people, the UK is also a very boozy-centered culture. And I started drinking in my late teens, and then especially when I went to university, because it's the done thing to do. We have something called Freshers Week. I'm sure you have it in the US at school, where it's like you really go hard on your drinking to make friends. And I never thought that not drinking wasn't an option. And as somebody who is quite a high achiever and very academically driven, I thought, well, this is great. I can blow off all this steam and make loads of new friends just by drinking alcohol. So let's go do that. And then I get in a cycle of binge drinking. I've blacked out quite a lot, got in some very nasty scrapes and situations, but it's all kind of brushed under the rug. I think especially if you are someone who has it together in other areas of their life, then people do cut you a lot of slack when it comes to your drinking. And this sort of continued for a few years. And then I became more stressed when I was a teacher. This was before I transitioned into TV. And then I got to a point where I was so stressed with teaching, I was really blacking out on a regular basis. And then I left teaching, transitioned into TV and thought, okay, I'm going to stop drinking. I'm going to be sober. But I did it with the sheer force of my willpower. So it only lasted 6 months. And then last year, I reached a kind of, I guess it was a low. It wasn't a low point, not like bottom of the ladder, that kind of point. But it was at my friend's bridal shower. I just looked around and thought, why am I doing this? Again, what am I getting out of it? I'm in this horrible cycle of feeling really low about myself. I'm not really performing as well as I can in my TV career. And I was also training to be a coach at that time. So I think I was very much more self-aware. And then I just decided to stop. And I read loads of books, read This Naked Mind, read The Unexpected Joy of Being Sober. And I realized I had to change my mindset around alcohol to realize that it didn't add anything to my life. And I've never been happier sober. And now I use that principle, that process to coach other women, not necessarily about their drinking, though drinking often comes up, which is very interesting, but about other areas of their life too.
Oh, that's awesome. I love that so much. So I just have a follow-up question. Maybe we can have a little bit of a discussion about this, because I love the, dichotomy between willpower and then changing your mindset. So can you tell me what that experience, like once the mindset was shifted, how did the sober experience match up to the sober experience when you were doing it on willpower?
Well, on willpower, it felt very forced, and it felt like I was punishing myself because I thought I've behaved badly because of alcohol. Therefore, I'm a bad person. So I have to control this and I don't deserve to have any more fun. I'm depriving myself of alcohol. So therefore, I cannot enjoy a situation. And then the second time it came around, when I realized that I really need to stop drinking, I thought, well, force of willpower didn't work the first time. So what can I use to make this easier? And I thought, well, I love reading. I'm a bit of a nerd. Why don't I just change my mind? Why don't I just educate myself and give myself some data and some facts that will convince me? And then we'll see how that goes. Like, actually weirdly play to your strengths, which is something you write about in the book as well. And that really helped. And then once it clicked in my mind that alcohol wasn't adding anything to my life, that it was the reason I was feeling so low, that I wasn't funnier, I wasn't smarter. I always thought I could speak French better when I was drunk. That's not true, because you can't conjugate a verb when you're really hammered. So it's all a lie. It's a complete lie. And once I started to have really good experiences sober, like going to my friend's wedding and leaving at a reasonable hour and dancing and not falling over on the dance floor, and I was like, oh, this is better because I'm still me and I'm sharper. So fantastic. So that's when it was more positive. It was more of what am I gaining from sobriety rather than depriving myself of alcohol. I think that was the biggest shift for me.
And it's so amazing because I had a very similar, experiences where it's like this chicken and the egg scenario, right? Like if you go into whatever the case is, whether it's a wedding or whatever, and you are not drinking because of willpower, but you feel like it's a bit of a punishment because you overdid it. So now you're giving yourself a timeout, and, you kind of are envious of everybody else who can just drink normally. And you're kind of in that mindset, like you don't have a good time, and it fulfills itself. And you spend a lot of the time in the night obsessing about the drink. And then if you can have this elusive mindset shift and you have a completely different experience, and then that actually reconfirms, how great it was. When I finally did have a mindset shift and I started to do things, there were so many like holdouts, I'd say, in my brain of like things that I swear were better with alcohol, and I was like, okay, on the whole, I can see that alcohol really isn't doing me any favors, but I had these things, but I was like, well, but I know I'm a better networker. I'm sure that I'm more creative and I have better ideas. We'd always have these drunk brainstorming. I've been in marketing. And so we'd always have these drunken brainstorming sessions. I was like, I'm sure it added to that. Right. But then I'd go to some of these things. I'd go to a networking event without drinking, and I'd go. And by the way, with the mindset that like, no, I don't want to drink, even if it costs me my ability to network. It's just not worth the hangover. It's not worth the feeling not like myself. It's not worth the can of worms that it's going to open. And so my mindset was different. I didn't feel sorry for myself. I didn't feel deprived, but I did feel like, yeah, but I might not be as good at this thing. And then I would go and I would have the experience that I was better at it, because guess what? I actually had to use my brain. I had to use my skills. I couldn't just fall into some stupid conversation. I actually had to think very thoughtfully about like, okay, who is this person in front of me? Where in my life can I connect with them, right? And I would find that there's always a connection point with another human if you just look hard enough for it. But all of a sudden, you're developing the skills to be a really engaging conversationalist. You're developing the skills to overcome social anxiety and break the ice. And, and you realize, wow, like feeling like you're good at something you thought was alcohol fueled on your own is like one of the coolest experiences.
Oh, it's brilliant, isn't it? You're just like, oh, I can actually say go into a room and talk to loads of people. And there might be that initial bit where it's a little bit tense or a little bit awkward. But once you break through that, you do have better conversations. Do you feel with people now you get to the heart of the matter a lot quicker? Because I feel before, when I was drinking, a lot of my conversations when I was drinking were very, very surface level and very superficial. And now that I'm sober, I find that I can connect with people much quicker and really kind of get to it, like get down to the nitty gritty, which is what I love talking about, like a nice, deep, meaningful conversation.
Yeah, not only do I feel that, but I also feel that I'm super intolerant of surface level conversations. And I actually noticed this with a few of my friends who are really heavy drinkers. Their mindset was very much that, before, I can't talk about these things, or I can't really let loose before I have a few drinks. And I knew this wasn't true because I experienced it now. But for them, they literally would almost avoid me until they would have a few drinks, and then they would come over and they'd be like, okay, now we can have whatever chat you wanted to have, because I didn't feel comfortable being vulnerable in a deep conversation without drinking. And it was really interesting. So I'd almost find myself like waiting around or wanting to show up a little bit later. But then it was this tiny little window, right? Because then if they're drinking, and by the way, they didn't need the alcohol, they just believed they did, so they did. Then you have this tiny little window where they're actually going to have a good conversation with you before they're drunk. And then they just kind of, it's absentee. You're looking in their eyes and you're like, yeah, so-and-so's left the building. They're not really here anymore. And so it was kind of like this little time. And I did find myself really like almost intolerant of small talk. You know, I still to this day, I want to hang out with people who are going to have like deep, meaningful conversations in even or humor or whatever, but it's going to be something besides like, I don't know, for me, and this is just maybe me, but like, I don't want to talk about the weather.
Be careful when you come back to the UK. It's our favorite topic of conversation.
Everybody, I know, and I can do it, but I'm just like, oh, like, okay. It's the weather. That's cool. But I'd much rather talk about like how you're feeling about something or what's going on with you. And, you know, I did notice that while I wanted to do that all the time, some people really didn't feel comfortable doing that until they kind of had, you know, a bit of a drink in them. I was curious for you. You talked about like people giving you a lot of leeway when you have everything else together. And I find that to be really, I didn't even realize it until you said it. And I was like, oh, that's so true. I think people accepted behavior from me because I was the quote boss, or because I, you know, was so successful externally that maybe they wouldn't have accepted from somebody who, and so can you talk more about that? Because I was like, that's really interesting.
I think that I mean, obviously as women, we're very socially conditioned to be caring and to be like certain things and to be people pleasers. But I think if you also fit into the mold of being academic or being successful, society really rewards you for that, I would say. And I worked really hard at school and at university. So you're kind of that's seen as like, oh, that's really positive, and it reflects very well on you and on your family and on your group. So I think when you do things that are a little bit subpar in behavior, people give you a little bit more slack because they think, oh, but Ella, she does really well and her grades are amazing and she always works hard and she's going places. So it doesn't matter if she can't hold her drink every now and then, or alcohol isn't really a problem for her, even though I was blacking out. And on my year abroad on a French overseas island, and if you can see it in the camera, to go that way, I got this horrible scar.
Oh, wow, yes.
Falling over in a club and landing on a wine glass and having stitches. And then I also passed out on a beach and I could have drowned. But that's all, oh, that's fun. That's fun Ella, who is also part of smart Ella, but that's when she's letting loose, but she's not always like that. So I think it's this idea that if you can control other areas of your life, you can control your drinking, and people want to believe that about you. So I think they give you a little bit more space until then you do something that they find so terrifying or so awful in your behavior, then it's confronted, but not while there are all those signs. People tend to brush them over because I now realize everyone in my friendship circle was behaving in exactly the same way. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't anything unusual. It was just, oh, that's a funny story. Oh, the time Ella nearly drowned on her year abroad, or the time she ended up in hospital. That's funny. It's like, is it funny? Like, it's funny now, but at the time. So I think it's very much, I guess it's like a double-edged sword of you're kind of rewarded for being, you know, an overachiever and doing really well career-wise. And then you're rewarded for drinking, but to a certain extent. So it's really interesting, but it's something I've been thinking a lot about recently, how some people are called out for their quote unquote, you know, unacceptable behavior and other people aren't. And I think a lot of it is to do with if you're seen as a successful person overall in your life, you get a lot more slack.
It's so interesting. I love that. I just discovered the comment. So hi, I won't call you all by name because I know we're trying to protect privacy and everything, but I see you all. We see you. This is great. We do have a great question. How do you combat the depression of starting over? I had 9.5 years sober until my mother's death, but I felt depressed that I drank again. So this is such a great question. I'm going to tell a little story, and then Ella, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well. So I heard this recently, and I just thought it was so profoundly interesting. So this is a story of, and you may be familiar with this, I was not, but how computers learn to play chess. And basically the computer is programmed and it's given the rules. So it's programmed with the rules, and it's given kind of this chessboard and all the players, and it's programmed with, here's what the players do, and here are the rules, and here's the objective. And that's it. And then the computer goes away and it makes a move. And it is a wrong move. and then it makes another move, and it's another wrong move, and it makes another move, and it's another wrong move, and then it makes a move, and it's a right move, and it's like, okay, great, and then it makes a move, and it's a wrong move, and then it makes like 1,000 more wrong moves and 1,000 more right moves, and eventually, actually very quickly, through trial and error, it ends up learning how to play chess, and very, very well. But at no point in time is that computer ever looking at the mistakes or the wrong moves or the things that didn't get it closer to winning and being like, oh my gosh, I can't believe myself. I'm such a stupid computer. I'm such an idiot. I mean, something really hard happened in my life, and I just made a wrong move, and oh my gosh, like it never happens, right? Like the computer never comes down on itself for the move, because it sees that every single thing that's happening is getting them closer to where they want to be. And so what I like to do in this situation is I like to hear the thoughts in my head and say, okay, something terrible happened. And guess what? You defaulted to the thing that society, the whole world, and by the way, probably a lot of your life experience told you was going to ease the pain. It is a very human thing to do. It is, by the way, doing the best you can with the tools you have. It was something tragic out of your experience, and that's what you did. So what thoughts are you hearing? Because if you're hearing thoughts like that means, what meaning are you making? Are you making that mean you're hopeless, you're screwed, you're a terrible person, you don't keep your promises? How do those meanings make you feel, and how do they make you behave? And then just find some more empowering meanings, which are like, wow, I hadn't dealt with that in 9 years. And by the way, your 9 years, it doesn't go away. They don't disappear. They don't not count. That's one of the things that make me so crazy about this conversation in recovery circles, is there's nowhere else on the planet that we measure success as 99.9% as a failure. You're at 99.9% of days. You're probably at 99.99999% of days over the last 10 years, you've been alcohol free. Yet you're a failure because you had a mistake, because something tragic happened in your life. No, you're like the computer. This thing that happened, if you allow it by not making it mean something horrible and just making it mean, oh, that was a lesson I needed to learn. That was a move I needed to make in that direction in order to make the next right move in this direction. How does that make you feel? How does that make you behave? Because you want a feeling of relief and grace and compassion for yourself. All of the science that they're coming out with these days, there's incredible studies, and they prove that compassion-based change is change that lasts. When people are nice to themselves on the inside, when people are nice to each other, that's when the change lasts. It's not guilt and shame that motivate you over the long term. It is compassion. And so that's my thoughts. Do you have any thoughts on that, Ella?
I love that. And I think the thing about being also, it's teaching you kind of emotional resilience as well, because I think we're always wanting to, because obviously this person, they wanted to feel a bit better because something so awful has happened to them. So I think it's sort of learning, okay, that was, like you said, that was my reaction this time. But unfortunately, the next time it happens, because, people do die, we can't control that. It's awful. At least you then, you have that awareness to think, okay, I might be likely to drink. How am I going to be more, like you say, be more compassionate to myself this time? Do I need to take more time alone? Or do I need to surround myself with my friends and family? Like, what can I do to build up that emotional resilience? Because that's what I think a lot of drinking is about, that emotional dependency and wanting to either numb out or forget or suppress emotions. And I think a lot of being sober is about courage to sit in your emotions, which I know is so, so hard, and especially with something as all-consuming as grief. But I think it's just the next time, like you say, you learn a bit more. So hopefully you can make a choice that you feel better about the next day.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that idea of processing emotions. And we run away from emotions. That's obviously one of the things that keeps us drinking, right? Is things we want to avoid pain. That's primal in our brain. Our brains want to seek pleasure and avoid pain and conserve energy. Those are the primal things they want to do. And they also usually want to prove themselves right. They don't want to, make a mistake. So they want to confirm what you already know to be true.
Yeah.
Really, this journey of evolving from basically, someone who's very much controlled by the lizard brain or the instinct to someone who's very human is you have to do things like lean into discomfort, push yourself out of your comfort zone, allow yourself to be present with emotions, which is the opposite of avoiding pain, right? You have to learn to delay gratification, which is the opposite of seeking pleasure. And you have to learn to, create more energy. Energy, just like love, is one of those things that the more you create, the more there is, right? So instead of conserving energy, you have to be like, yeah, that conserving energy, that was for a time when we had to, for survival. By the way, so was the seeking pleasure and avoiding pain. Those were things that were very primal in survival. They don't really apply much anymore, right? Especially when the things that we have for pleasure at our fingertips are things that have been chemically engineered, like alcohol and high fructose corn syrup, and to overstimulate the parts of our brain that want to make us do it again, right? We're really in a pickle. And so the more we can become aware of this, and the more we can say, okay, actually, to get where I want to go, I need to lean into my emotions. And sometimes you won't have the guts to go all the way there, and sometimes you will. But what I like to do is I like to just actually kind of try to feel stuff on a schedule sometimes. And what that looks like is, when I know something is going on, set aside time just to feel it and journal it and release it and let it out. And it's amazing because the emotions are there and they're going to come out anyway. I have this memory of my kids and I in a hot tub, and they were all having they had blown up balloons and they were trying to hold them under the water. And eventually, of course, they would pop up. That's like your emotions. So you can actually schedule time to say, I'm going to sit here. I'm going to feel this. I'm going to remember something very emotional about my mom, and I'm going to lean into it. I'm going to let it be hard for the next hour. That's what I'm going to do. And then I'm going to treat myself to something fabulous, like maybe a banana split, but that's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to lean into this, because then you allow yourself to process it. And what grief needs to be is it needs to be processed. It really does, because avoiding it and numbing it with alcohol or with whatever else, busyness, Instagram, doesn't matter. It's going to be there. It releases when it's processed. And of course it will never fully go away, but,
no, it doesn't. And it still comes up. I lost a really good friend 4 years ago now, and that's when I was drinking. And even now it still comes up, like the memories of her. And it did last week when I was just walking to go for a swim, and I just felt like a wave of it come up, and I was like, oh, here it is again. I was like, oh, I thought I was done with this, but I'm not. And I was like, okay. And then I was just walking to a swimming pool, and I was like, I'm just gonna have to cry. I'm just gonna have to walk and cry, and then swim, and then I'll feel better. But you have to allow it. I was like, oh, that's a wave of it, and that's fine. And now I start to think about it in a way of, oh, it's remembering all those fun times together, all that love and that friendship. It's just a memory of that. I'm trying to kind of reframe it as that, but that's taken me a long time to get there, I must say. But it's still hard. It's really hard.
So there's another question. I'll let you field this one. What excites you most about your own sobriety?
Oh, what a great question. I love the freedom. I feel like I have kind of so much more energy and so much choice about what I want to do. And also I feel like so much more has opened in terms of my potential, realizing that I have so much more to offer than I thought before, because I think that alcohol definitely kept me small. And it's really helped me to kind of reassess as well my own background, my own racial heritage, which has been really, really interesting, because it's something that I really avoided thinking about before I was sober. And now I'm looking at that with a fresh perspective. So I'd say the sense of freedom. What would you say, Annie?
That's beautiful. Yeah, for me, it is, I think it is really the smaller moments. And what I mean by that, one of the things, and I'll just give you an example of something that feels really strange to even talk about. But one of the things that I appreciate a lot in my life is those moments when you lay down in bed before you fall asleep, and kind of when your mind drifts and it goes a little wonky, and it's kind of having nonsensical thoughts, and you're kind of in that liminal space between waking and sleeping. I had robbed myself of that for more than a decade. I mean, it was very much I would drink until the lights went out. I would wake up with a glass of wine by my bed, usually mostly drank or all the way drank. And I would drink until I wasn't conscious anymore until like my neural connections had slowed down enough to where I wasn't conscious, instead of intentionally saying, I'm going to intentionally end my night right now. I'm going to intentionally lay down and relax and go to sleep, which is just really awesome. Like it's nice. It's such a small thing, but it's really nice.
Oh, I love that. That's great. And also, just on that note, like the quality of sleep when you are sober, it's just that never gets old. I'm just like,
so
great.
So true.
So good. Oh gosh. What other questions have we got? Oh, what about drinking when there's real intergenerational trauma? There are many heavy drinkers who've had trauma and feel such shame, sadly. What's your advice to them? Oh, that's a very kind of meaty topic. I think I've not read a lot about it, but I think there's also a kind of idea in families that alcoholism is inherited. I think that's something that in my family we believe about the Northern Irish side, because you think people from Northern Ireland are known to drink, and then through that you have that, you would say, the trauma of addiction, and I think what it speaks to me, what I've understood it in my own family context, is that the trauma isn't necessarily about the alcohol, it's about something else behind it until you heal that trauma, and then it stopped passing from one generation to the next. That's how I think about it. But I think there is a real kind of train of thought that there is a kind of alcoholic gene in families, and that also gives people kind of the excuse of, oh, well, of course I'm an alcoholic because, you know, my aunt is or my grandma is. And the more I think about that, I'm like, is that true? And I don't think it is. What do you think, Annie?
So yeah, first of all, I want to give a shout out. We're to some path people on here and some Naked Mind coaches. I see you guys. It's awesome. So good to see you. So I've thought a lot about this, and the research that I have done says that there are some genes that do correlate, and there's some personality traits that do correlate, but there's no single gene that can be passed down. And so but that gene that may correlate may not correlate in a certain percentage of people and may correlate in a certain percentage of other people. And then there's a mixture of genes. And just thinking about it, you know, from my own analysis, I think what is much more likely than, you know, a really true, quote, alcoholic gene that you can test for. And by the way, if we could, wouldn't we be testing for it? Wouldn't we be trying to say, hey, let's take that test and then you better stay away because you have this propensity, right? I think it's much more likely that when you're raised in a house where alcohol is present, even if alcohol is present, my cousin, she was raised in a home where alcohol was present, but her mom was a really happy drunk. And so she was really loving. But she knew that her mom wasn't all the way there. And so she said, when she'd come into my room at night and I could smell the wine on her breath and she'd be so loving, it still nothing made me feel more lonely. Because although she wasn't violent or abusive, she was coming into my room and I could tell that the real her wasn't really there. And it made me feel very unsafe and very lonely in those moments. And so I think that this intergenerational being raised by someone who is intoxicated most of the time is going to leave scars. And how do we deal with those scars if we've been raised in a family that says, hey, you self-medicate with alcohol, your chances of doing that, I think, are really high. So I kind of think that this elusive gene that nobody's been able to find, and there's mixed science about it, like, that's okay. We can have that theory and maybe we can find it and test for it, and that would be great. But maybe the theory we should focus on is the more obvious one of just like being raised in a home where there is intoxication does leave wounds and does leave scars. And by the way, we can break that. I do want to say something else on this that I think is possibly a little bit different. And I will caveat this to say that I'm not an expert on trauma or intergenerational trauma or anything like that. But I did have an experience in my life recently that really opened my eyes up to something. And it's almost the flip side of this conversation. So I have just said in general that, you know, my childhood was like awesome. Like, yes, my parents got divorced, but it was great. And like, really, like I've given myself this story that things were really, really good. And I was going through this kind of coaching exercise and asked about a time where I felt anxiety. And I feel anxiety when people leave. And I was looking back and I was asked to kind of like talk about some times where I didn't feel, you know, secure in somebody coming. in my childhood. And I remember that there was often times when my mom was really busy with work and she would be very late for picking me up from school. And sometimes it was fun and we just played on the playground. And those are the times I'm like, yeah, it was no big deal. It was no big deal. But other times it wasn't so fun. It might have been snowing, or I might have had to go sit in the principal's office and wait. And it was embarrassing and all of this stuff. And I'm thinking of this experience and I'm really justifying it in my mind. And I'm saying, yeah, but it's not that big of a deal. I mean, can you imagine, like, people don't have food, people are abused, people are, assaulted, like it's no big deal. And the coach, he said, well, what meaning did you make? And he said, okay, let's look at it a different way. If you are on the phone with somebody, you call somebody and they don't call you back, what's your first thought? And I was like, oh, he's like, is your first thought like, they're really busy? Or is your first thought like, they're just kind of a jerk, they don't have time for me? Or what's your first thought? And I was like, well, my first thought is probably like, I just don't rank on their priorities. He's like, oh, that's interesting. So what meaning did you make when your mom was late? And I was like, I think I made a meaning that I just wasn't ranking on her priority list, that I wasn't worth, being on time for. And he's like, oh, that's interesting, because then guess what? You've probably told yourself that meaning for, 4 decades now, pretty much. And I was like, wow. And therein lies the trauma, is that subconsciously I've been telling myself for a very, very long time that I wasn't worthwhile. And one of the things that I realized after this call with him, and I was like, I could have been at the hands of abuse, really serious abuse or trauma, and something really terrible happened, and I could have given myself the same meaning. I could have given myself the meaning that I'm not worthwhile. Or I could have a mom that didn't pick me up and I gave myself that meaning. Or I could have something even more benign, like I was embarrassed in front of my class for something and I gave myself that meaning. It's the meaning that you give yourself over and over and over that creates the thing that you're medicating from. Much more than the circumstance is what you made it mean. And I think that is where the work is. That's where the forward-thinking work is to be done to really unravel this, is take 100% responsibility for the meaning that you created. And by the way, you probably created that meaning out of self-defense. You probably created that meaning because it served you. You probably protected yourself in a lot of ways. And it probably really was a good thing. But if you're finding yourself stuck now, it can really be just time for a new meaning, And so I went through the process of being like, yeah, the meaning was that had nothing to do with me. Like, my mom was just busy. She was trying to put food on the table. Recently divorced. She had 3 kids. I was the oldest. So I was the one that if she was going to be late to any, by the way, we all went to different schools. She could be late to me. She probably the meaning was like, she felt me to be responsible. And that for me is such a more empowering meaning that really serves me in my life. And by the way, no matter what and how horrific it is, you can always realize that it wasn't about you. You can always go through the work and the coaching to create the meaning that it wasn't about you, because they were broken. And that can be really empowering. And the thing that I think is most interesting about this, no matter what, is that our default mode, especially if we feel like we've had relatively good lives, that we feel really blessed and we're trying to really be on the gratitude train, our default mode is to say, well, it wasn't that bad because the circumstance wasn't as tragic as this or that or the other thing. But we do ourselves a disservice because we don't allow ourselves to heal and create new meanings when we minimize something that, not that painful in the whole scheme of things. I wasn't starving. I wasn't being hit. But I never in 40 years allowed myself to heal from that because I spent so much time being grateful and minimizing it. And I'm never advocating going to the victim mode because there's no power there. But going into wait a second, I did make a meaning, I think can be really powerful. So I think trauma is very intense, but I think it can be really intense too when we talk ourselves out of the fact that we may have had any at all.
Absolutely. It's just, what you're saying is just making me think about kind of old childhood beliefs I had as well, especially the feeling, which is very common, I think, with people who then do depend on alcohol, is not feeling good enough, and where that comes from, and like a small incident, and then you believe it, and then you kind of then find more circumstances to build up a case in your mind. Or for me, it would have been like, if one time my grades weren't as good as the time before, and that would have been like devastating for me. It's like, oh, I'm not good enough anymore. So then you that creates a sort of small sense of trauma within yourself, if you're kind of building up a particular identity and something happens that intercuts that or erodes that, it's really painful. I think especially when you are a child and you're obviously taking in so much information and building all these neural pathways. So it's really interesting to then, like you say, go back and then reassess that and think, oh, maybe that was a bit of trauma, but actually there's a different way of interpreting that. There's a new belief I can have, which is my self-worth isn't dependent on my grades or my productivity now. That would be the self-belief now being in work. It's like that, trying to separate that from your intrinsic worth as a human being. But it takes a while to get there, to kind of peel back all those layers. But no, trauma.
Yeah. And I think what the comment is, what they're saying in a roundabout sort of way, is it's ineffective long-term to use the juice to keep the inner demons quiet. Yeah. Not only is it ineffective, but it would have prevented me. I would have never been able to have that healing of even realizing that I had this subconscious belief that I wasn't worthwhile. Like, I didn't even realize that. Yeah. And it was affecting me. It was holding me back in a lot of ways, but I couldn't have even had that epiphany or done that work was I still drinking. Yeah. And the main reason is because when you are self-medicating, you are taking, emotions are your guide map. Emotions are the things that say, hey, there's something here that you can fix. And I know that doesn't feel true when you're overwhelmed with your emotions, because they just feel like a nasty thing that you wish you didn't have. But it's kind of like pain. Like, imagine if you didn't have pain, you'd be able to burn, your finger and never even know it was burning. Like, pain keeps us healthy. Emotions, when they're tuned into and they're listened to, they can keep us healthy, because we can say, oh, there's something here that I need to pay attention to. And one of the things that's so true is, like, external wounds, you can see them a mile away. You're bleeding, you're festering, whatever. But we have these internal wounds that when we medicate, it's like putting a Band-Aid over something that actually needs to be cleaned and healed. And so the more that dark, moist Band-Aid is, the more it festers, the more it grows. And you can't do that work. It is, again, the chicken and the egg. We drink to numb our emotions, yet the work to heal the reasons you're drinking comes from being present to your emotions enough to use them as a guide to say, oh, this is where I need to be healed. This is where I need to look into what's happening.
Absolutely. And once you start kind of on that journey of discovering one, then another one pops up. But then I think also one of the many gifts of sobriety is having that level of self-awareness, like you say. And it's the same for me. I've only been able to look at that whilst being sober and really start to go deep and change those limiting beliefs and start to heal some very deeply buried internal beliefs that I have about myself. Because, like you say, you just push them down when you're drinking. You're like, for me, it's like, oh, that's too uncomfortable to think about race or to think about not being good enough, so I'm just going to drink over it. Like, no, like, it's too hard. Whereas in sobriety, it's like, okay, I need to look at all of that, and now it comes up. And then also you feel like you're more mentally prepared and more aware and have the tools to do it, because you're no longer numbing out. So it all goes together. So then your recovery happens much easier. So yeah.
Absolutely. So we have 2 minutes left. Let's finish up with this last question. What are your coping strategies for any triggering moments you might have?
Oh, I think for me, it's all about, it depends. It's all about the planning. So I know if I'm really tired or exhausted, then I can't go to particular events. Not that we can do a lot of socializing now anyway. So those are my triggers when I'm tired or stressed. So if I know that I'm going to be particularly tired, especially after filming, then I have to book myself a day of doing absolutely nothing, just to decompress. And that really, really helps me. So I think knowing my triggers and planning for them and giving myself time off really helps. What about you, Annie?
Oh, that's so good. I think that's absolutely true. I also think, similar to emotions, I think triggers are there to tell us something. And it's again, like the balloon below the surface. If you have a trigger and you're just kind of ignoring it and trying to avoid it, it will never solve. But what I've seen, with people who work with me and in my own experience, is that every single trigger can be solved. And it just takes the right questions of, why am I feeling this? Getting curious about it, experiencing it, allowing yourself to feel that desire for a drink and really getting curious about why. And you really, truly can solve it. So It's amazing. Thank you guys. Thank you, Ella. So good to get to know you.
Yeah, it's been wonderful. I've loved it. Thank you so much, everyone, for your lovely questions, and stay safe. Yeah,
It's been absolutely amazing, and so good to see everybody in the chat.
Yeah.
So good.
Bye.